December 16th, 1944. 0530 hours. The snow lay heavy over the Schnee-Eifel Ridge on the Belgian-German border. The frozen mud cracked beneath the boots of men who had no idea they were about to step into history. 200,000 Wehrmacht soldiers stood ready. They believed they understood their enemy. They had been told that the Americans relied on material wealth, not fighting spirit. That these citizen soldiers were soft compared to the hardened German warrior. Within hours, they would discover how catastrophically wrong they were. The mathematics of firepower were about to deliver a lesson that would shatter every assumption the German soldier carried about his enemy. Because each American infantryman carried what General George S. Patton would later call, in a January 1945 letter to the Chief of Ordnance, the greatest battle implement ever devised. The M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. Against this weapon, German soldiers would find their beloved bolt-action Carabiner 98K hopelessly outmatched. The German soldier of 1944 carried essentially the same rifle his father had carried in 1918. A bolt-action design tracing back to the Mauser model of 1898. After each shot, lift, pull back, push forward, lock down, mechanical, slow, unforgiving. Even for an expert rifleman, 15 aimed rounds per minute was the maximum. The German infantry squad was built around the MG-42 machine gun, an excellent weapon, capable of spewing 1,200 rounds a minute. The riflemen? They existed primarily to protect and feed that machine gun. Their Carabiner 98K's rifles were considered secondary tools, good for a precise shot or for defense. This doctrine had carried the Wehrmacht from Warsaw to Paris to the gates of Moscow. But now they faced something different. The Americans had rewritten the rules of infantry combat. Every American carried a semi-automatic rifle, 8 rounds fired as quickly as one could pull the trigger. Then, with a quick motion, reload with a fresh en-bloc clip in under 3 seconds. Where a German squad carried 1 machine gun and 9 bolt-action rifles, an American squad carried 1 machine gun, 1 automatic rifle, and 11 semi-automatic rifles. The disparity in firepower was overwhelming. The revelation began in North Africa, 1943. At first, German soldiers dismissed the reports, but at Kasserine Pass, their officers sent urgent messages back to Berlin. The Americans appeared to have semi-automatic rifles in large numbers. Berlin's response? Dismissal. They suggested these reports confused semi-automatics with Thompsons or other submachine guns. Because, they reasoned, producing semi-automatic rifles in such quantity was impossible. American industry, they said, could never achieve such scale. They were catastrophically wrong. By February 1943, Springfield Armory and Winchester were producing over 4,000 M1 Garands per day. By D-Day, more than 3 million had rolled off American production lines. The German war industry, even with slave labor and total mobilization, had managed only experimental quantities of semi-automatic rifles. According to U.S. Army records from North Africa, German prisoners expressed disbelief when shown the numbers. One captured report from Tunisia stated, "American infantry units appear to possess semi-automatic weapons as standard equipment. This cannot be verified, as it would require industrial capacity beyond reasonable estimation." But it was true. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The beaches of Normandy burned under German fire. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's proud defense, roared with machine guns, mortars, and artillery. Yet, amid the chaos, the M1 Garand proved itself once again. Men of the 1st, 4th, and 29th Infantry Divisions stormed Omaha Beach. Their rifles, reliable, fast, deadly, spat fire against the fortified German defenders. Survivors would later recall how, even when pinned down, the steady rhythm of Garand fire gave them courage. Because every man, every squad could answer back, not with single cracks of a bolt rifle, but with a storm of semi-automatic shots. And on those bloody sands, every bullet mattered. Once inland, the fight shifted to the bocage, the dense, ancient hedgerows of Normandy. Walls of earth and tangled roots, twisting lanes where sight lines vanished after 20 meters. Here, the German soldier, master of defense, believed he had the advantage. Hidden machine guns, interlocking fire, mortars zeroed on narrow approaches. For centuries, those hedgerows had been natural fortresses. But the Americans carried something new into those dark lanes. German reports describe the shock. Instead of scattered rifle fire, their ambushes were met with volleys, 10, 15 shots in seconds. Each hedgerow corner became a duel, but the Americans had the faster hand. Quiet, measured. Prisoner interrogations revealed German astonishment. One captured sergeant admitted, "We thought only your best units had these rifles. Then we found every man, even replacements, carried them." This was not elite equipment. This was standard. The M1 Garand was not a privilege. It was a promise. Every American rifleman had one. And in that summer of 1944, the hedgerows became a graveyard for German doctrine. Still, the price was high. The bocage swallowed men and machines alike. Entire squads vanished in the tangled earth. But step by step, hedge by hedge, the Americans learned,
adapted and advanced. The power fire of the M1 Garand was no longer just a weapon. It became a symbol of American industry, of citizen soldiers, of a nation that refused to yield.
August 1944. The Falaise Pocket, a disaster for the Wehrmacht. 200,000 German soldiers encircled, crushed between the hammer of American and Canadian forces and the anvil of the British. The once proud divisions of the Panzerwaffe reduced to shattered remnants. On those narrow Norman roads, choked with smoke and wreckage, entire German armies died. The fields were littered with burnt-out vehicles, broken helmets, and the silence of defeat. Captured reports from this battle reveal a new kind of despair. German officers wrote of unprecedented volumes of rifle fire, of units broken by infantry alone, without tanks or artillery. It was the Garand, the thunder of semi-automatic fire that chewed through ambushes, repelled counterattacks, and turned every squad of Americans into a wall of bullets. For the Wehrmacht, it was a nightmare that kept repeating. And yet, Hitler was not finished. By December 1944, the Allies had pushed to the very borders of Germany. The Siegfried Line stood, battered but not broken. Winter fell across the Ardennes, quiet, still, deceptively peaceful. Then December 16th, at dawn, the forests erupted. The last great German offensive of the war had begun, the Battle of the Bulge. Through snow and fog, German tanks surged forward. Tiger IIs, Panthers, armored columns wrapped in the white silence of winter. Behind them, infantry pressed hard, fueled by desperation and the promise of turning the tide. The American front lines buckled, green troops broke, towns were lost, the enemy drove a wedge deep into the Allied line. For a moment, it seemed as though the Reich had seized back the initiative. But in foxholes and frozen forests, the M1 Garand spoke once again. Bastogne, Malmedy, Elsenborn Ridge, names that would be carved into history. Against wave after wave of German infantry, American riflemen held fast. The semi-automatic crack of the Garand echoed through the snow, faster, steadier, deadlier than any bolt action could answer. In the frozen silence between battles, men remembered that sound, the comforting rhythm of their rifle firing as fast as their heartbeats raced. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was survival. And in the Ardennes, that survival would come at a terrible price. December 1944. The Ardennes burned white with snow and red with blood. The Wehrmacht pressed hard, desperate to split the Allies and reach Antwerp. American units, cut off, outnumbered, freezing, fought tooth and nail. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held the crossroads, surrounded, shelled, starving, yet unbroken. Every man clutching his Garand, waiting in the fog, firing into shadows that rushed through the trees. At Elsenborn Ridge, infantrymen of the 2nd and 99th Divisions stood against the German advance. Wave after wave came at them, panzer grenadiers, armor, artillery fire. Yet the ridge held, not by miracle, but by steel and by lead. Reports from the German side described incessant semi-automatic fire from the ridges. They wrote of attacks shattered, of formations breaking under storms of bullets before they could even close the distance. The Garand was everywhere, mud-caked, frozen, battered, yet it kept firing. In the hands of farm boys from Iowa, steel workers from Pittsburgh, and clerks from New York, it leveled the playing field against an enemy that had once terrified the world. By January 1945, the Bulge collapsed. German losses were catastrophic. Tanks left burning in the snow. Bodies scattered across the white silence. The Reich had gambled everything and lost. And as American forces pushed east, crossing the Rhine, liberating camps, and rolling into Germany itself, the sound of the Garand echoed all the way to Berlin. It was not just a rifle. It was the reassurance of firepower in every foxhole, the equalizer against a battle-hardened enemy, the proof that American industry and American soldiers could outlast, outfight, and overcome. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. He was not exaggerating. By the war's end, over 5 million M1 Garands had been produced. They armed not just the men who stormed Normandy or who froze in the Ardennes, but the generations that followed in Korea and beyond. It was heavy. It kicked hard. It pinged when empty. But in the hands of those who carried it across Europe and the Pacific, it was more than steel and wood. It was survival. It was victory. It was history.
When the war was finally over, millions of men returned home. Some brought their Garands back as keepsakes. Others left them behind, buried in Europe's mud or scattered across the islands of the Pacific. But the memory of that rifle never left them. They remembered the cold steel in their hands, the reassuring weight across their shoulder. They remembered the way it barked back at the enemy, shot for shot, round for round. It wasn't perfect. It was heavy. Its 8-round clip gave away a soldier's position with a sharp ping when empty. And yet it never stopped. It never gave up. Neither did the men who carried it. Even decades later, veterans would speak of it with respect, sometimes even affection. Because the Garand wasn't just a weapon. It was the sound of freedom echoing across Europe. It was the thunder that rolled through the Ardennes. It was the steel backbone of a citizen army that stood against tyranny and won. That's why, to this day, historians, collectors, and soldiers still call it by the words of General Patton, the greatest battle implement ever devised. And that brings our story to a close. If you enjoyed this journey, if the story, the history, and the voices of the past kept you listening, then I'd love for you to join me again. Hit that like button if this storytelling touched you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more untold stories, hidden histories, and the moments that shaped our world. Thank you for spending this time with me, for remembering, for imagining, for listening. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next story.